what I want to talk about firstly is what's the biggest difference here between boy psychology and man psychology? Well, there are really three levels that make up boy psychology, and you have to understand all three. The first being that there are some core developmental wounds or a lack of certain developmental characteristics that are essentially held within the unconscious of these men. The main one being potentially too much of an enmeshment with their mother. So they were too close to their mother. Maybe they were too, up in their personal space. They offloaded a lot of their decision making to them. They expected them to cook and clean and do all these things for them so that they didn't have to do it. Again, they were very reliant on them. And in a lot of cases, they were probably a bit coddled and smothered by them. On the inverse of that, there's also, like I said at the start of the lesson, the problem with a lot of men not having very masculine role models as fathers, whether their father's absent because of their parents' divorce or because their father actually just wasn't much of a masculine man or wasn't much of a leader, didn't have assertiveness. He just kind of existed, went to work, came home, and he was always just nice. Both of those situations are going to be two of the core, let's say, wounds or events that are going to bring about this trapped state in boy psychology. And so that's the first thing. But as we look at the actual characteristics and traits of men who are stuck in this sort of boy psychology, a lot of it comes down to the fact that they are not reliant on themselves fully. They're reliant on other people. They're reliant on their parents to make decisions for them. They're reliant on other people to cook and clean for them or organize their lives for them. They're reliant on other people to pretty much do everything outside of the bare essentials for them. And again, there's going to be different levels to this for everyone, but the biggest defining factor here is that you're offloading a lot of your responsibility and blaming other people or blaming events in your life. You're offloading your decision making. So when you have a crossroads, you're not really thinking through it independently and making a decision. You're leaning on your partner or your mom or your dad or your friends, and you're always offloading decision making to them, or at least relying on them to try and validate your own opinion because you don't trust yourself fully. And I mean, there's just a lot of childlike behavior, right? A lot of creating drama, being conflict avoidant, being people pleasing, and being too self sacrificing. Potentially even being on the inverse of that, which is a bit arrogant and a bit of a childlike teenage boy arrogance. There's, again, passivity in your relationships, being a bit passive aggressive or being a bit of a step over or a walkover or a pushover, or being the inverse of that, which is, again, arrogant, overly dominant, a bit narcissistic. What you really want to look at in terms of the symptoms are men who are acting like boys. And I think that the people who will probably know this best are the partners of those men. But essentially, all these different characteristics, including even addictions, right, being too reliant on games and distractions and instant gratification and things that aren't really long-term focused, these are all going to be a lot of the core symptoms. Looking at the inverse of that, though, what differentiates boy psychology from man psychology? The main difference is self-reliance, right? People who have made this transition are incredibly self-reliant. They don't rely on other people to make decisions for them or to think for them. They don't rely on other people to solve their problems for them. They don't blame anyone else for the problems they have or for the things that they've had to go through. They don't blame circumstances either. They don't try and say, oh, I would have been able to do this, but this other thing got in my way. Or I would have been able to do this, but this person did this thing and it stopped me. They're not going to make any of those blaming assumptions. They're going to take absolute accountability and responsibility for everything that happens. And they're not going to offload, a lot of the responsibilities, for example, of house care and of child raising to their partner. They're going to do their fair share. They're going to do their half, and they're actually going to be responsible as adults. So those are the two, I guess, big differences, right? The primary difference being the level of self-reliance. These people are very reliant on other people, again, for everything that we just discussed. These people are incredibly self-reliant, they have high self-worth, and they actually trust in their own decision-making and leadership, and so they are self-led, right? These men are led by others, these men are self-led. So what does a man have to do to actually go through this transition, to actually make it across this bridge and make it to the other side? Again, whether you're a young man or whether you are actually an older man who's still trapped in that younger man psychology or boy psychology, well, there is really a separation that has to happen, right? So the first thing that you have to do, like I said, is go through a separation. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have to separate your current identity from the traits of childhood and of the environments of childhood. So if you are, again, still overly dependent on your parents as an older guy, whether you're always running decisions by them or you're always running pretty much everything that happens in your life by them. If you have a problem that you have to solve, you always ask them before you try and figure it out yourself. From everything like, obviously, I mean, arranging a mortgage, for example, or something like that, and you're always leaning on them because they've done it before, and you want to just go, hey, Dad, can you just tell me how to do this and help me do it so I don't have to figure it out myself? You have to stop doing all those things. When you need, say, emotional support, if you always tend to run to your mum to complain about things, to look for her to support you, or if you ever get in a bit of a funk or you have a problem that you have to deal with, you always offload it to your parents. Again, you have to stop doing that, because until you're able to separate from the elements of your psychological experience as a young man, you're never going to be able to fully transition through to the other side. Now, the next step that we want to actually go through is the initiation of the transition, right? So we can imagine this is almost like a death of your, I guess, version 1, your boyhood psychology. And then we can actually begin, I've kind of fucked this one up. We can actually begin the transition. So what does that look like? This means you actually have to sit down and kind of create a code for yourself to live by. The types of things that, for example, your set of values, your actual vision for your life and who you want to become, the types of characteristics that you want to possess, right, and the traits that you want to possess, as well as a list of all the traits that you have to let go of and the things that you have to let go of. Because again, to get across, you have to identify what you have to let go of here, and you have to identify what you actually need to step into to cross to this other side. And then the third piece is actually beginning to integrate those traits, which is, again, taking action on the things that you've defined here, like your set of values, your set of principles, your moral compass, the vision that you have for yourself, the characteristics you have to build, the characteristics you have to let go of. You have to actually begin to integrate this plan or this new code that you've created for yourself into reality through taking action on it, which means when you do have a problem that you don't, even consider offloading it to other people, like your parents, for example. And you just decide, no, you know what, this time I'm actually going to figure this out myself. I'm not going to run to my dad. I'm not going to run to my mum. I'm not going to run to my partner. I'm going to actually take the time to truly solve this by myself and be truly self-reliant. Because until you're able to begin to make that full transition into self-reliance, you're always going to have one foot trapped in boyhood, and it's going to hold you back from being able to fully transition over to the other side. And so this is really you adopting a whole new sense of responsibility and a whole new identity and acting in alignment with that. A lot of the time, this might also require letting go of a familiar environment. If you still live at home, it's probably going to require that you move out of home. That was, for me at least, the real defining factor. It wasn't actually moving out of home. It was when I moved out of home and when I broke up with my ex and I lived by myself and I didn't depend on anyone for anything. That was really when I was able to let go of all of the elements that I was trapped in here, even just the blaming and the resentment that I had towards people and the blaming of, my position and my outcome of life on other things or past experiences or whatever it may be. It gave me space to process and actually be self-reliant, from cooking every meal myself to solving every problem myself. And that, when I came out of that, was able to really instill in this sense of me, this sense of self-reliance and self-trust that I could figure things out and that I didn't need to depend on other people. Because when you can lead yourself like that, you can then lead other people like that. And you will feel like you truly have stepped into this final echelon, that final stage of your evolution as a man. So that would really be everything I'd cover here. Again, this is essentially the modern rite of passage. It's a transition and separation from your old environment, from your old line of thinking, from your old reliance tendencies and your tendency to rely on other people, and transitioning into a more self-reliant frame of mind. So if that was valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll leave another video here for you, and I'll see you in the next one.